So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmery on Relevant Radio.
How do you live a meaningful life? What's the secret to happiness? I'm not going to give you the 5 steps to happiness today, but what I am going to do is help you understand yourself, who you are, and why there's actually a clear path forward for seeking happiness as human beings. Later on in the show, we're also going to be talking about how gratitude is actually something that can really motivate us in life. Some people try to say that gratitude can make us complacent, but I find that fascinating in a culture that's so obsessed with productivity that it can't even stop to be grateful. Stop, smell the roses, look at nature, appreciate the relationships and friendships we have. I think that that's why sometimes people become so cynical and resentful, is because we don't foster a culture of gratitude. And so here you are. Welcome to our happy hour. It's Monday. If you'd like to join the conversation, maybe you have a question, you can either call us at 1-888-914-9149, or we'd love to hear from you on social media. Just head over to relevantradio.com/trending, and you can weigh in on the happy hour by connecting on social media, leave a comment on Twitter, Instagram, whatever you want to connect through. We would love to hear from you. Now, joining me in a little bit is actually going to be someone I'm really looking forward to speaking with. Her name is Katy Faust, and she's the founder and director of an organization called Them Before Us. But how I heard about her is because she is one of the state group leaders, a volunteer working with an organization called CanaVox, whose executive director we interviewed last week. And they're a marriage movement, and they basically have reading groups across the nation for every person to dive deeper into understanding what marriage is and how we can better defend it in this culture so that we can be a soft landing place for loved ones, but also respond to them with truth and maybe even help give some solutions in the midst of those conversations. So don't go away. That's what's lined up for today. But let's talk about this theme of happiness and some of those secrets to happiness. If you've ever heard this, there's a great philosopher by the name of Aristotle, and he lived about 300 years before Jesus Christ. He wasn't a Christian, but in the Catholic tradition, it's firmly believed that if he knew Christ, given what he came to understand about human nature, virtue, happiness, and friendship, this man was someone who was clearly oriented toward a higher being, that is, God. But he lived in a Greek culture, again, about 300 years before Christ. Now, he says essentially that happiness is living well and acting well. This is for us human beings. I'm going to say that again. It'll be a theme for much of today's show. Happiness is living well and acting well. But I find it fascinating because in our culture today, you and I tend to reduce happiness to thriving on whatever comes our way. If you think about it, if something comes our way, we win the lottery, we get a new job, all these different things, good friendships. You know, people talk a lot about karma in the modern culture, and I think that people maybe are more so driven by karma as their source of happiness rather than what's really key here for understanding our day-to-day happiness. And the fact that it's not about what comes our way, it's actually about a life of action. Yet again, I have to emphasize this. We tend to kind of complain, life has dealt me a bad hand. If only the circumstances were different. If only this. If only that. Then I would be happy. Then my marriage would have stayed together. Then my kids would be doing better. Then they'd be practicing their Catholic faith. We tend to use excuses for kind of what comes our way. It's all about what we've experienced. And it kind of reduces us to just living a life based on pleasure and feelings. Basically, this life that I'm talking about, that we're struggling to find happiness, is where you and I just live this receptive life that we think happiness is whatever's pleasurable that we end up experiencing. but we're actually called to be people of profound action. Aristotle wrote what I would really call an entire book on happiness. It's called the Nicomachean Ethics. And boy, does he understand human nature. Now, his launching point for the book essentially is living a happy life. But he really takes you throughout the course of the book on how do you get there. He talks about things, for example, such as virtue, friendship, generosity, and so many different elements. In fact, when you often hear me talking about friendship, some of the greatest work and conversation surrounding friendship comes from Aristotle. Because remember, we're social beings, and I think that's important to keep in mind, even in this conversation about happiness. You see, we have to understand that this is about who you are. We are a body and a soul, right? What does that mean for us human beings? Again, Aristotle says that happiness is living well and acting well. But you see, we need a target in order to hit the mark. Now, as Catholics, we believe that our target is heaven, the beatific vision, living in union with God. But you and I also know that there are elements to working this out day to day. And Aristotle, again, a man who wasn't even Christian, understood a lot about human philosophy, anthropology, the purpose of our life, where we came from. We need to know, in order to hit this mark, what is good in the culture, what is good in life, what is true, not what is pleasurable. In fact, when we focus on what is pleasurable, we reduce ourselves to living just on instinct. Kind of just like the animals, when you think about it. Many of us, although unintentionally, really are. Now, people are going to say, yeah, I'm not the person having premarital sex. Yeah, I'm not the alcoholic. I'm not this. I'm not that. But I think there are a lot of ways that we don't consider that pleasure has really crept into our lives. The way we reduce our friendships to pleasure rather than generosity, giving toward them. It's just about the fun time we have. We reduce sometimes food overly to pleasure, what makes us feel good, rather than what's necessary to function in life. And not that these things can't be enjoyable, but we put too much emphasis on the pleasure rather than what is good and what a thing's purpose is. Your individual good is something that's incredibly important. However, because we're social beings, the common good actually does matter. Now, this is a fascinating kind of point to dive into because we were talking about plastic surgery the other day. And in fact, I'm excited because my guest tomorrow is a plastic surgeon. And we're going to be talking about the role of plastic surgery in the culture, all kinds of various perspectives on it. But last week, I was asking what you thought about plastic surgery. And I broke down a little bit of the church's teaching on it. Well, there's nothing definitive, but one of the comments that stands out to me and what the church often says has to do with societal pressure on women, not just women, but women and men. And kind of this attitude that, well, sure, there might be forms of plastic surgery that make us feel good on an individual level. We have to also consider the pressure that that is also putting on the society, the standards that are being upheld. So although experiencing or going through plastic surgery might be great on an individual level, what is it doing to the overall culture for the common good and women's understanding of themselves and their standards of beauty? And might I just kind of go a step further and say general self-acceptance? So that's why when Aristotle talks about happiness, it's not just about you. It's about the common good of others as well. This is why I keep thinking about Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. And you'll probably hear me quote this 100 times on this show. But there was something he said some years ago that always stood out to me. He said, the world offers you comfort. Honestly, I think we could replace that with pleasure. He says, the world offers you comfort, but you weren't made for comfort. You were made for greatness. Putting my own spin on that, you weren't made for pleasure. You weren't made to just please yourself. You were made to go beyond yourself, to seek a life of communion with others and have that be God first so that you can understand the good in the other person. Have you ever wondered why we live in a culture that is so incredibly educated, but general happiness has actually declined? I think it's because we're living in a culture based on feeling, essentially pleasure yet again, rather than a culture that takes action, that takes responsibility. A culture that understands the dignity of the human person. And I have to say, hold up here, because we Catholics tend to say the dignity of the human person. In fact, it's a word we've used a lot having to do with the pro-life movement. And I hear the general culture now using quote-unquote dignity language, yet we need to explain our terms. What makes us a dignified human being? It means that we're created in God's image and likeness, and we're created to be with Him. But to be created in His image and likeness means that we're made for love, and love requires intellect to be able to come to know something, and it requires free will to be able to put into practice in our body this combination of the understanding of the body and the soul. I'm not just a body that's meant to run marathons and chase after hobbies to find my happiness. I'm actually a soul that has the body and soul component that I can come to know something and apply it in my very own body. Aristotle talks about happiness and the importance of shaping our desires and actions. So remember, happiness is living well and acting well. It has the goal of heaven and it requires virtue. And this is why on Mondays we have a whole happy hour talking about how do we actually live that out? You're listening to Trending with Timmery. To join the conversation, go ahead and give us a call at 1-888-914-9149. You can also reach out on social media. Just head over to relevantradio.com/trending with your questions and thoughts during the show. You can connect right there to all of our social media platforms. I'm very excited for my guest today. Her name's Katy Faust. She's the founder and director of Them Before Us. But the reason why I've actually reached out is that she's the Washington State group leader for an organization called CanaVox. You may remember last week I talked about the booklet, Tips for Talking to Your Kids About Sex. CanaVox produced that book. CanaVox is a marriage movement that offers reading groups to friends to support the historic understanding of marriage, to keep it simple, and to make it applicable to day-to-day life. Katy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Timmery. Very nice to be with you.
I'm excited to dive in. I want to talk about some of those tough cultural issues that you handle so well with love, generosity, compassion, but also honesty. And we want to be that soft landing place ultimately for people to come to when they're struggling with things. But let's talk about how CanaVox has been a part of shaping you to really address these cultural issues. So what is CanaVox and how do their reading groups function?
CanaVox is kind of what I feel like is the final frontier of free speech zones, where people can get together and talk about all of these difficult cultural issues that have to do with marriage and relationships and sex, and really study the best free materials that are on the web from a natural law perspective, and gain a better understanding about what's going on in culture right now. So we take these great readings, and then we, in the context of a relational environment, talk it through, study it together, and then look at how it applies to our own life. So it's really been incredible for me personally, and I know for the people that have joined my reading groups as well, because you kind of get to the point where you go, wow, I didn't know that there was so much support or so many good reasons, or I didn't understand how these issues tied together, and now I feel more confident about standing up for some of these core fundamental values that our society was built on.
And I love it because I was looking through your reading list, and some people might say, okay, you want me to join a reading group? What, you want me to join a book study, a book club? And actually, I was looking at a lot of the content, and they're short videos, they're articles, thought-provoking pieces, for the most part, that are featured through the program. Can you share a little bit about the material and how it is accessible for most everyone?
Well, it's free, and that's my price. So that's one thing that I love, is this whole thing is free. But we have curated the very, very best of what you're going to find on the web, again, from a natural law perspective, so that you can have, you can kind of springboard into these conversations into using a platform and an understanding that's common to all of us, right? Like social science and stories and natural law and common sense. And so it really does sort of bridge the gap, especially for people who are more maybe have a better understanding of what their faith teaches, but don't necessarily have a way to talk about it with people who are not necessarily in their faith tradition. So there's all kinds of incredible resources that you can find on our reading list, and going through them together with other people who have a common goal of better understanding this and working it out in real life is really where the magic happens.
And Katy, it's interesting because I know a lot of people who perhaps haven't had the opportunity or haven't taken the time to dive in to understanding the inner workings of the marriage movement, yet they have this natural understanding, I think part of our human nature and our conscience, and understand there's a difference between men and women, that marriage is for men and women only, that, male, female, only men and women can get married, one of each, right? That abortion's wrong, that gender, there's some problems with this gender ideology, yet they want to go deeper. And so CanaVox is offering these opportunities. So you talked about some of the core values of being rooted in natural law, social sciences. Now, this is an ecumenical movement, not just one faith, not just Catholic, not just evangelical. Can you share a little bit about the people that are involved?
Well, we only have the best people involved. I mean, I can't believe that I've fallen in with a group of women like these women, and one very noble male leader that we have as well. But we've got Jewish reading groups, we've got Muslim reading groups, we've got Catholic reading groups and LDS participants and leaders. I think, we've got several evangelicals. I'm like the token Baptist pastor's wife, on official staff. But it's pretty incredible because you find that, when you are not arguing, but studying these issues from a natural law perspective, you actually have quite a lot of allies, who are also moving towards this marriage reality together, because many of these faith traditions are based in the reality of the complementarity of male and female and the importance of this fundamental institution.
That's Katy Faust. She is one of the group leaders based out of Washington, leading reading groups for CanaVox. You can find them at CanaVox.com. We'll be sure to post links on social media. Katy, in your discussion groups, as you're working through the materials, what are the most common cultural issues that you see coming up in these groups that people are just really grappling with?
What's fascinating is, we will schedule, typically groups meet once a month. And so maybe the upcoming issue is going to be surrogacy, right? Studying surrogacy. And then, strangely enough, you'll have some celebrities, I can't believe I'm forgetting his name, but the CNN anchor, right, who just announced that he had a baby through a surrogate. And so you're like, wow, this is so timely because this is what's happening in the news. We have a session on religious liberty, and it's so fascinating because it feels like whenever I lead my group, whatever we're about to study just happens to be what's going on in the world right then. We study a lot about marriage and the importance of marriage, but, a lot of times we'll study fatherhood and the importance of fatherhood right around the time that Father's Day comes up. And so we really have a deeper understanding about why these men in our lives deserve so much credit and so much appreciation. Obviously, the issue of transgender ideology has been in the news, and it's the resources that we have on, transgenderism, the evaluations of often what goes into somebody who experiencing transgender feelings. Man, that is just critical information when you're seeking to understand what's going on in your children's friends group or what they're watching in media. And so all of these, we really hit all of the big hot topics that are kind of making their way into our world today, regardless of how sheltered our children may be. These kinds of things are happening in our world, and CanaVox helps equip us to encounter those and view them through a natural law lens, and then kind of give you a safe space to work out those conversations before you do it online, or before you do it with your neighbor, or before you do it with that family member who sometimes, maybe is gunning for a confrontation. So it's just a great place to learn and to work these questions out in a relational space.
Katy, I think that's so important because I find myself even in certain topics, in the midst of a friends group, we might be debating a certain nuanced element to, let's say, the quote unquote gay marriage debate. And people have, they agree with the overall picture, but they say, well, what about this? What about that? And so we have to work out these nuances. And like you said, sometimes that's important before we go to social media. We're actually talking to a friend or family member who's really struggling with these issues. Also, what stood out to me, what you said, I was kind of thinking maybe you'd have that one topic or two topics that are really standing out in terms of what people are struggling with. But you mentioned kind of this fast-paced culture, the surrogacy issue, and Anderson Cooper, who just, like you said, had that child through a surrogacy, the importance of fatherhood as we see this emasculation of men. It's every single day, it's a new topic that's just in our face. And it's hard to play catch up. And so having a group like CanaVox, I imagine is so helpful, for people to have those reading materials to be able to dive in. Why do you think some of these topics have come up more often recently, besides, to say, the Anderson Cooper example?
Well, it's very hard to keep up, and you're exactly right. That would be a good question for our academic director, Anna Samuel, who spends a lot of time studying philosophy and the philosophy of all of this. But my response to that is we really have forgotten what it means to be human. All of these issues that CanaVox tackles have to do with what does it mean to be human, and friendship and marriage, and what does it mean to be secure in our biological sex. And how does that work itself out when it comes to like communication in marriage and fidelity in marriage and all of that? And all of it is rooted in really what does it mean to be a human person? And that is a question that our culture does not have a good answer to. And it is something that you can find when you come to your CanaVox groups.
I love that. It's so helpful. Again, that's CanaVox.com if you're interested. I believe about 47 of the states actually have groups now at this point. Any states where you're looking for leaders still, Katy?
Oh my goodness. Well, here's the good news. Like, you can be a leader no matter where you are. We have developed this streamlined but dense training program that is, again, free. And so if you're interested in starting a CanaVox group, I always tell people you can do this. You don't have to be an expert on divorce or IVF to start a CanaVox group. You're really just there to facilitate a conversation, and it's not Fight Club, right? It's not like this is where we come and debate, right? This tends to be something where we say, look, get your like-minded friends together. Get your friends together who know that just something doesn't feel right out there in the culture, and they want to be equipped, and they want to be more compassionate, and they want to have a better understanding. A lot of moms, because they want to be able to pour into their children who are really kind of drinking out of a fire hose of cultural ideology on many of these topics. And so you can do this. Anybody can do this. You're there not to teach. You're there to facilitate a conversation with your like-minded friends. And I will tell you, it's transformative. When I first joined CanaVox, I was blogging and I was writing about the importance of moms and dads. But it was really going through the CanaVox materials that allowed me to talk confidently about cohabitation and helped me understand like the real long-term damage of divorce and took me deeper into understanding, the harms of reproductive technologies. And we sometimes joke at CanaVox, like, you come out of this with your master's in marriage, right? You really have kind of a holistic idea of what are all these subjects and how are they connected and why do they matter?
And I love it because it's accessible. And I think that that's part of when we had heard about CanaVox. In fact, it was Father Rocky here at Relevant Radio who told me about CanaVox. And we love the program because it offers that opportunity for people in an accessible way to get together and have these discussions that they want to have, but sometimes they're afraid of who to speak to, that someone's going to bite their head off for having a certain question or maybe even a disagreement. I remember someone not too long ago kind of had been always involved in youth work in the Catholic Church, and then one day she had this question where she was pro-life, but there was one area where she didn't quite agree with the pro-life movement, but for years she was afraid to ask that question. And so we need to foster that environment of conversation. We'll be right back here on Trending with Timmery with Katy Faust from CanaVox.
We're talking about what you're thinking about. You're listening to Trending with Timmery on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
The Relevant Radio studio line is sponsored by Catholic Order of Foresters. Employment opportunities to become an agent or information about their flexible premium life insurance plans are available at relevantradio.com/Forester. My guest today is Katy Faust. She's one of the group leaders with an organization called CanaVox, helping to lead reading groups that are accessible for everyone in your local community. Just head over to CanaVox.com if you're interested in learning more. Katy, in a second, I want to talk about one of your vlogs that you did surrounding gender dysphoria and also a lot of your outreach and the importance of speaking to our loved ones about gender identity issues in this culture right now. But between the breaks, you and I were talking about CanaVox and just the importance of also having that element of action and having an opportunity, if we so feel called and if we have the gifts, to dive into more of the elements, for example, politically. California, I live here in California, you're in Washington. We're a hotbed of some pretty controversial legislation that can actually be fought with grassroots efforts. Can you share with us a little bit about your grassroots efforts as well?
So I love what you're saying, and I think you're 100% right. So a lot of why I started Them Before Us has to do with the fact that so many of these laws are being passed completely unchallenged, especially when it comes to speaking up on behalf of the children. So Them Before Us is defending children's rights to be known and loved by their mother and father. And these days, especially in issues of reproductive technology, you have massive interests, well-moneyed interests that are pushing through bills that fundamentally deny children's rights to their mother and father. And oftentimes, legislators never even hear that there's a downside for kids. So we started that Them Before Us because we want to make sure that any legislator that's considering writing a child's mother or father out of their life before conception first hears exactly the impact of that law on the life of children, and it's always detrimental. But what I love is that not everybody has to be an activist, and some people don't want to get out there and fight and blog and argue. And so there is still a place for those others out there who really care about marriage and family and see kind of the sexual insanity taking place in the world and say, I want to do something. And that's what I love about CanaVox, because there is this soft power that mothers wield in culture, and it's a power of influence. And mothers are the primary influencers and fathers of their children. And so by instilling this information into our own children, we really are radically shaping the culture. But also, moms have this incredible connectivity among their networks, whether it's chatting with the other moms, on the sideline of their sports fields, or connecting in school activities, or involved in their church groups, that moms actually have this amazing influence. And there's a lot of power in just equipping moms with good information about all of these worldview issues.
That's Katy Faust of CanaVox and also the organization Them Before Us. And you're joining us, Katy, during our happy hour. And you're a very joyful person who's willing to dive into these conversations. And I think that that's so important. You mentioned earlier, what does it mean to be human? This is the ultimate question that people are asking. We talked about that at the beginning of the hour, how people are looking for these secrets to happiness and how it starts with understanding our human nature. Same thing with understanding gender identity issues and marriage. I want to talk about this gender identity issue. You have talked about the importance of loving our loved ones who experience same-sex attraction, transgenderism, or participate kind of in this queer movement. How do we become kind of that soft, compassionate landing place for people who are struggling with these issues, whether it's themselves or maybe a child, and at the same time give solutions and information without being pushy?
Yeah. Well, I love what we cheer for that we have at CanaVox, which kind of outlines our main principles. And some of those are everybody, regardless of their sexual feelings or race or age or anything, have inherent dignity. And then also, all of us are made for true friendship. And so at CanaVox, we're very cheerful, And we initiate relationship with those who are different from us because we recognize that they have something to offer us and we have something to offer them, especially in the context of true friendship. And so we often talk about, we have a whole session in our reading groups called Loving Those with Same-Sex Attraction. We want to be very purposeful about reaching out to and connecting with people who are different from us or maybe disagree with us. So we're not afraid of that. And so we would say, go out there and celebrate their birthdays and serve them and water their plants for them when they're out of town and be the first one to do it. Don't wait for them to reach out to you. You reach out first. And then at some point, the conversation may come up about what you believe or what you think or why you're teaching your kids a certain thing. And that's where you are equipped to gently but firmly explain why you believe that marriage is actually an institution that is necessary for human thriving, or why you believe that men and women offer distinct and complementary benefits to children, or why you believe that reproductive technologies can violate the rights and the health and the needs of children, and that's why you oppose it. And so we want to do both, right? We want to hold on to the dignity of our friends and family who may identify as LGBT or who disagree with us in one hand. And in the other hand, just as firmly, we want to hold on to truth. And it's a truth that CanaVox kind of helps us articulate well.
That's Katy Faust of CanaVox. Katy, you're reminding me of my upbringing. I grew up dancing in the dancing world and then have been involved in the Pilates and fitness world for some years after that now. And it is a learning environment. There are people who are different from us, like you said, who we can learn from. And you emphasize, it starts with building relationships with these people. And then that opens the door ultimately for being a gentle but firm place to have these conversations. And it reminds me of a story when I was dancing right here in California, and we were battling Proposition 8, which was to hold in our state constitution, uphold that marriage was between one man and one woman. And it passed. Californians, believe it or not, California of all places, upheld, like I believe almost 40 other states in the last 20 years or so, that marriage was between one man and one woman. And at the time I was dancing and of course had multiple, dance teachers and friendships with various people who were living contrary lifestyles to what we believe. We're in same-sex relationships and so forth. And I remember at one point it was hard for some people because we were really involved in the Prop 8 movement, the pro-marriage movement. And it hit a point where one of the teachers I could tell was having a tough time. We had some of the stickers. I remember, there'd be conference calls as we're running in and out of the studio in between classes. And at one point, my mom just sat down with one of the teachers and said, listen, I'm not, this isn't about me disliking you or anything like that. It's about upholding what marriage is. And I remember it ended up turning into a really profound conversation. And what it touched on is he really recognized that what marriage is really only possible between a man and a woman. But there's just this innate desire for love that he's like, but I want it. I want someone to be able to say I can have it, to kind of somehow approve of my lifestyle by making this law. And it was a fruitful conversation, yet I don't think that would have been possible had the relationship, like you said, not been there.
Agree. And it sounds like your mother was like a founding mother in spirit for CanaVox, because
Yes.
That's exactly it. Like, we want to offer our friendship and we want to build relationships with everybody because everybody has inherent dignity. And we also want to be able to articulate that none of these positions are held because of animus or phobia or bigotry. All of them are grounded in these critical human truths that deserve to be upheld and defended when needed.
Katy, on CanaVox.com, you have a Dear Katy vlog, and one of your vlogs is on gender dysphoria and what to do. Someone wrote in because their sister-in-law and their own nephew ended up experiencing some gender dysphoria issues. And I love where you kind of directed the conversation. Can you talk a little bit about some of the advice you gave this person who wrote to you?
Well, we have a team that develops the Dear Katy videos, and so I hope it looks like I'm just riffing, but I'm not. We spend a lot of time researching and a lot of time floating the scripts before people who are very familiar with the research, with psychologists, because we want to make sure that even though we're not giving professional advice, we're giving good advice. And so in this video in particular, what we found is there are so many people that go to radical extremes when their child says, I feel like I'm a boy trapped in a girl's body, or I'm experiencing some gender dysphoria, or I identify as trans. And those extremes can be very damaging. One extreme is just to follow your child wherever they go and consent to them taking hormones that can permanently damage their body, or binding their breasts, or tucking and taping their penis, all of which have pretty significant health risks that go along with it. So that's one extreme. The other extreme is just kind of pulling the plug and cutting them off and completely denying the fact that what's going on in them is real. And so we really try to help parents walk down a middle road, which is seeking to understand, asking good questions, really working with the child's within their freedom and within their ability to reason, and really getting down to the heart of what's going on here. Why are you feeling this way? And we talk about how it's kind of like you need to do some rapid response, and that might include some extreme choices for the parent. Like, do you need to pull back from work? What do you need to do to connect with your child right now in this critical moment? Because what they need is they need more of you, and probably less of some negative, damaging influences that they're getting either from peer groups or online voices that they're hearing. And so we really try to walk people through, look, you need increased connection with your kid. You need to avoid some dangerous extremes. And then you need to do lots of listening and influencing. And that's really the key, is getting to the point where you can influence your child towards healthy choices around these feelings that they're having. So I was really grateful that we spent a fair amount of, normally the videos are 3 to 4 minutes. This one was like 7 minutes or something, because this is a hard question. And it's one that more and more parents are confronting these days.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I say this often, an eating disorder used to be kind of one of the ways that sometimes both in a real serious issue that people are having, but also sometimes ways they would look for attention, children at times. And I feel like, this is the new vogue way of a child like expressing something deeper is going on when they're saying or experiencing this gender dysphoria. And so I really appreciated the kind of concluding advice after you laid out so much of the natural law, the social science information as to what happens when you just transition your kid. And you said, focus essentially on leading your nephew to understand what's going on, that he's rejecting his body. That's the big question, rather than just giving the hormone replacement therapy, just doing the sex changes, or tucking and hiding body parts because they feel uncomfortable. What is deeper going on the level of who he or she is, whether that's our own friends or family members in the culture. That's been Katy Faust. You can find her and her organization's work at CanaVox.com. Again, that's CanaVox.com. We'll be right back here on Trending with Timmerie during our happy hour. We're going to talk about how gratitude actually motivates us to become better people.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Welcome back to the happy hour here on Trending with Timmerie. It's great to be with you. And we're going to dive into happiness from the perspective of gratitude. But first, I wanted to let you guys know that this Friday is the feast of St. Jose Maria Escrivá, the founder of Opus Dei. Father Rocky, our executive director, is a priest of Opus Dei and naturally will honor St. Jose Maria in a special way on his feast day. And you're invited to join along as Father Rocky offers a Mass in honor of St. Jose Maria Escrivá this Friday at noon Central. Just listen on your local station or watch at relevantradio.com or on the Relevant Radio app. And you can also find all the episodes of Trending there. If you didn't get to hear the full happy hour, this is your daily dose. Forget about 5 tips to happiness every week on Mondays, that's what we're talking about. And earlier, we really started to break down how important it is to be a person of action. This is what's fundamental to our happiness because, you guys, remember, we have intellect and free will. We're a body and soul, not just a body experiencing pleasure. We're called to act and interact with the world, not just be pleased by everything that comes our way or depressed when things don't go our way. And so one of the really neat things that I like to focus on myself is gratitude. You may have heard me mention it before, that especially at certain points in my life, I'll, at the end of the day, especially maybe when you're having a hard time going to sleep, you're thinking about this thing and that thing, you're frustrated, things aren't going your way, to take out your rosary and walk on each bead, saying one thing you're grateful for until you make it all the way around. It actually doesn't take that long, and it's not that hard. A person, an experience that happened today. I mean, how often, think about it this way, and this was something that when my husband and I got married and we started praying together, especially at night, I always tried to start night prayer with saying the things I'm grateful for. And I'd always say, thank you for my home. Thank you for the land we live on. And it was something that he just wasn't used to, kind of just running through some of the simplest things, like thank you for the food that we have. And it became such a turning point, I remember, for him. This is a really neat thing to do that helps me to appreciate what I have, no matter what's going on in my life. But you know what's interesting? There are people who try to say that gratitude leads you to being complacent. Can I just say that again? To be grateful makes you a complacent person. And so if you're grateful for things, you're not a go-getter. You're not taking action in your life. You're not being responsible. Wow. Talk about signs of the times. I think one of the greatest, things blocking us from being the men and women we're created to be in this culture is the culture of productivity that we are being stymied by. We can't even be a woman or a man in this culture because we are so pressured to achieve and just be a cog in the wheel of whatever machine that you're involved in. Whether it's your job, and sometimes we even reduce our family to this. Well, I'm just called to be the mom, and function is maybe these two parts of motherhood that I think are most important, and then other parts are missing. Or I'm just challenged to be, this position at my job, and I need to achieve, and everything else from my health, my diet, my exercise, my faith, my relationships with friends and family go out the door. And so don't pay attention to people who say gratitude leads to complacency, because I think you and I, all of us, could use a little more gratitude in our life. And the truth of the matter is, there's a ton of social research that shows that gratitude is actually a huge motivator. In fact, there's been recent research done by Christina Armenta and Sonia Lyubomirsky. And they talk about how in researching this, things continue to show that in some way, I'll tell you this, that gratitude promotes self-improvement and it promotes positive change in our lives. Remember at the beginning of the show, I was talking about how we're called to be people of action and how Aristotle defines happiness according to living well and acting well. That means we have to do something, even something with our thoughts. And so as I'm looking at this research in this article, it's talking about how the research on gratitude shows that gratitude can be activating for us. It can activate us and even energize us and be an energizing force that propels us toward pursuing our goals. It doesn't make us complacent. It says, okay, I've done well, now let's move forward. Or, okay, I've done well, let's savor what I've been working for all these years. For example, maybe you know someone who's just graduated college and they feel all the pressure to get that job in a difficult economy. Yes, they should be focused on getting that job. However, it's okay and it's good to, for a moment, be grateful and appreciate the fact that you just finished college. You've done well. You're ready for the next step in life. I'm not saying to just sit there and not do something, but to actually pat yourself on the back and be like, yeah, this is good. I'm grateful for the people who helped get me here. I'm grateful for the things I learned. I'm grateful for the topics that radically challenged me as a human being. You see, gratitude can actually really transform our lives in incredible ways. It can lead us to become better people. It can lead us to become more socially engaged with others. Remember that we are social creatures. And so gratitude doesn't just mean being grateful for the things we have, but for the people we're surrounded by. And so again, gratitude can be a huge motivator in our day-to-day life. Don't pay attention to the cultural narrative that says, me, want, grab, get, move forward. We've got to pause. And I have to tell you, I do think this is a result. I live here in Southern California. I grew up in the mountains in Southern California. I'm a total mountain girl. I love nature. But I have noticed something different. In a fast-paced city environment, it's a little more difficult to appreciate what we have because we're separated from nature. And nature is something that we are really meant to savor, just like art. Have you noticed that the quality of music, even the quality of art, has become so lousy? I think it's because we haven't learned to appreciate and be grateful for those things around us in art, in music, in entertainment. They're all things that we've just not really allowed to kind of survive in this culture. I think the things that people most admire are unfortunately things that just kind of go far too far away in terms of dating. 100 years ago, 200 years ago. It's something to think about. And even further back, 500 years ago, think about our love for the art. Looking back to the Renaissance, looking back to various time periods, it was a long time ago. We have this huge gap in the quality of art and music and so many other dimensions. So I challenge you, when thinking about happiness in our culture, to not just follow what the culture says about what we need to get, but instead choose to live that contributive purpose. I mentioned a couple weeks ago, one day when it really stood out to me, what Father Robert Spitzer of the Magis Center had to say when he talks about 3 elements of kind of starting your day in prayer. He talks about specifically, the one that stands out to me is to live a contributive purpose rather than a comparative one. That comparative purpose can get in the way of your day-to-day life because it's just this passively looking at what's happening on social media, what's going on in other people's lives, and feeling this dissatisfaction. But in reality, if we live contributively, if we choose to be the change that we want to see in the world, we're a lot happier in our day-to-day life. I'll be back tomorrow here on Trending with Timmerie with a plastic surgeon to give the how, to, and what of plastic surgery and understand it within a Catholic context.